Imagine a soldier who believes that killing is not just permitted, it is holy. A man who puts on armor the way a priest puts on vestments. Who rides to war carrying a sword in one hand and a prayer in the other. Who believes that every enemy he cuts down brings him closer to God, and that dying in battle is not a tragedy but a reward. Now imagine an entire military order built on that belief. Thousands of men, bound by iron discipline and iron faith, marching across continents under a white cloak bearing a single black cross. This is the story of the Teutonic Knights, one of the most feared military organizations the medieval world ever produced. They began as a small field hospital outside the walls of a besieged city in the Holy Land. They ended as the rulers of a sovereign state that stretched across the Baltic coast of Europe. And the road between those 2 points was paved with more blood, iron, and fire than almost any other story in German history. To understand the Teutonic Knights, you have to understand the world that created them, a world on fire with religious war. In 1095, Pope Urban II stood before a crowd in Clermont, France, and gave one of the most consequential speeches in history. Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christendom, the place where Christ had walked, died, and risen, was in the hands of Muslim rulers. Urban called on the knights and nobles of Europe to take it back. Not as a political campaign, not as a war of conquest, but as an act of faith. A pilgrimage made with swords. What followed was the First Crusade, a massive, chaotic, brutal movement of tens of thousands of soldiers, pilgrims, and adventurers who marched from Western Europe all the way to the Middle East. Against all odds, they succeeded. In 1099, Crusader forces captured Jerusalem. Christian kingdoms were established along the eastern Mediterranean coast, the Crusader states, thin strips of territory surrounded by Muslim powers that would spend the next 2 centuries trying to take them back. Holding Jerusalem required soldiers. Permanently stationed, highly trained, religiously motivated soldiers. And out of that need, the great military orders of the medieval world were born, the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, and eventually, the order that would have the most profound impact on German and Eastern European history, the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Order was founded in 1190, during the Third Crusade, outside the walls of Acre, a port city on the coast of modern-day Israel that the Crusaders were desperately trying to retake from Saladin's forces. The siege had been going on for 2 years. The Crusader camp outside the walls was a miserable, disease-ridden place. Thousands of soldiers and pilgrims were sick, dying of dysentery and fever in the heat of the Middle Eastern summer. A group of German merchants and knights from the city of Lübeck and Bremen set up a field hospital, a makeshift shelter made from a ship's sail, to care for the German-speaking wounded who couldn't communicate with the French and Italian doctors that dominated the existing hospitals. That sail tent hospital was the beginning of the Teutonic Order. Within a few years, it had been formally recognized by the Pope, given a rule based on the Templars and Hospitallers, and transformed from a charitable organization into a full military order. Its members took the 3 monastic vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience, and added a 4th, to fight for the defense of the Christian faith. They wore white mantles with a black cross, simple, stark, immediately recognizable on the battlefield. For the first decades of its existence, the order fought in the Holy Land like all the other Crusader forces, defending castles, escorting pilgrims, fighting in the endless campaigns that gradually wore down the Crusader presence in the Middle East. But the Teutonic Knights had something the other orders lacked, a powerful patron base in the German-speaking lands of the Holy Roman Empire. And when a Hungarian king offered them land and military responsibility in Eastern Europe, the order's leadership saw an opportunity that would change everything. In 1226, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II issued a document called the Golden Bull of Rimini. In it, he granted the Teutonic Order full sovereignty over any lands they could conquer from the pagan peoples of the Baltic region, particularly the Old Prussians, a Baltic people who had been raiding Christian territories for decades. This was an extraordinary grant. The emperor was essentially saying, "Go north, convert or destroy the pagans, and whatever you take is yours." Not as a vassal, not as a subject, as an independent sovereign state. The Teutonic Knights didn't need to be asked twice. What followed was the Northern Crusade, a decades-long campaign of conquest, colonization, and forced conversion that swept across what is now Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. The Old Prussians, who had resisted Christian missionaries with considerable violence, now faced not missionaries but armies. Heavily armored Teutonic Knights, backed by crusading volunteers from across Europe who came for a season of holy war before returning home, advanced methodically through the Baltic forests and river valleys, building castles as they went. The castles were the key. Unlike the hit-and-run tactics of earlier campaigns, the Teutonic Knights built to stay. Every major advance was anchored by a stone fortress, Marienburg, Königsberg, Memel, that could not be easily taken back. The local population faced a brutal choice: accept baptism and submission, or face destruction. Many fled. Many were killed. Many converted under duress and then revolted, beginning cycles of resistance and repression that lasted for generations. By the mid-1200s, the Old Prussians as a distinct people were essentially destroyed, killed, displaced, or absorbed into the new colonial order the Teutonic Knights were building. Their name survived, attached to the new German-speaking territory the order controlled, Prussia. The same Prussia that, 6 centuries later, would become the military core of a unified Germany. At its height in the early 1300s, the Teutonic Order's state was one of the most efficiently organized political entities in medieval Europe. The capital was Marienburg, a massive red brick castle on the Nogat River in what is now northern Poland. It was the largest Gothic castle complex ever built, covering an area greater than any other castle in the world. From Marienburg, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order administered a state that controlled the entire southern and eastern Baltic coast, ran a sophisticated trading network, maintained a standing army, collected taxes, issued laws, and conducted diplomacy with the major powers of Europe. The Order's military machine was formidable. At its core were the Knight brothers, fully professed members of the Order, heavy cavalry in full-plate armor, trained from youth and bound by their vows to fight without flinching. Supporting them were semi-brother knights, hired mercenaries, and the levies of the German colonists who had settled in the conquered territories. The Order also maintained a fleet of warships on the Baltic, giving them a strategic mobility that their opponents struggled to match. The iron that had armed Arminius's warriors in the Teutoburg forest, that had equipped Charlemagne's cavalry, now encased the bodies of the Teutonic Knights from head to foot. Medieval plate armor had reached a level of sophistication that made a fully armored knight nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. A charging line of Teutonic Knights was one of the most terrifying sights on any medieval battlefield. But power invites opposition. And the Teutonic Order, in its relentless expansion, had made enemies on every side. The Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, 2 of the largest powers in Eastern Europe, had watched the Order's growth with increasing alarm. The Lithuanians were the last pagan people in Europe, and the Order's stated mission was to convert or destroy them. The Poles had their own territorial disputes with the Order, and had lost lands and cities to Teutonic expansion over the decades. In 1385, Poland and Lithuania united, the last major pagan kingdom in Europe accepting Christianity and merging with the Catholic Kingdom of Poland in a dynastic union. With this single political move, the Teutonic Order lost its religious justification for attacking Lithuania. But the conflict didn't end. Land, trade routes, and decades of grievances kept the war going. The reckoning came on July 15, 1410, at a field between 2 small villages in Poland, Grunwald and Tannenberg. The combined Polish-Lithuanian army was the largest force ever assembled in Eastern European medieval history, somewhere between 20,000 and 39,000 soldiers. Facing them was the Teutonic Order's army, smaller but arguably better armored and equipped, under Grand Master Ulrich von Junginger. The battle lasted most of the day. It began with a Teutonic cavalry charge that initially pushed back the Lithuanian forces on one flank, but the Lithuanians executed a controversial fighting retreat that drew the Teutonic Knights out of their formation and created chaos. The Polish heavy cavalry held in the center, absorbed the pressure, and then counterattacked. By late afternoon, the Teutonic line had collapsed. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen was killed on the battlefield. Almost the entire senior leadership of the order died with him. It was the worst military defeat in the order's history, and it was one they never fully recovered from. The Battle of Grunwald didn't destroy the Teutonic Order immediately. The order survived for another century, slowly losing territory, influence, and military power through a combination of war, debt, and internal decay. In 1525, the last Grand Master of the Teutonic Order in Prussia, a man named Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach, converted to Lutheranism, dissolved the order's rule in Prussia, and transformed its territory into a secular duchy under Polish suzerainty. That duchy would eventually pass to the Hohenzollern family. The Hohenzollerns would build it into the Kingdom of Prussia. And Prussia would become, in 1871, the military and political core of the unified German Empire. The white mantle with the black cross was gone. But the territory it had carved out of the Baltic wilderness, the military culture it had created, and the state structures it had built, all of these fed directly into the stream of German history that was still flowing toward the future. There is something deeply uncomfortable about the Teutonic Knights, and it's worth sitting with that discomfort. They were, by any honest measure, colonizers. The peoples they conquered, the Old Prussians, the Lithuanians, the Baltic tribes, had their own cultures, their own histories, their own relationships with the land. The Northern Crusade destroyed many of those cultures permanently. The Old Prussian language died out. The Old Prussian people as a distinct group ceased to exist. They were, by any honest measure, colonizers. The peoples they conquered, the Old Prussians, the Lithuanians, the Baltic tribes, had their own cultures, their own histories, their own relationships with the land. The Northern Crusade destroyed many of those cultures permanently. The Old Prussian language died out. The Old Prussian people as a distinct group ceased to exist. And yet the Teutonic Order also built. They built castles and cities that still stand. They created trade networks that enriched the entire Baltic region. They brought German settlers who cleared forests, built farms, and founded towns. The territory they carved out would become, centuries later, one of the most consequential pieces of ground in European history. History rarely offers clean villains or clean heroes. The Teutonic Knights were soldiers of faith who committed atrocities in the name of God and built a civilization on the graves of the people they displaced. Both things are true at the same time. From a field hospital made of a ship's sail to the largest castle complex in the medieval world. From a tent outside Acre to a sovereign state on the Baltic coast. The Teutonic Knights traveled a long road, and every mile of it was marked by iron. Next time on Bloodlines of History, we leave the Knights and enter the Age of Fire. The invention of gunpowder changes everything, and no one adapts faster than the German city-states and their legendary Landsknecht soldiers. Mercenary warriors who rewrote the rules of European warfare and made the pike and arquebus as feared as any knight's lance. That's episode 4. Subscribe to Bloodlines of History so you don't miss it.